Good afternoon, everybody. Hello. Welcome to the Sustainable Places event series at the Bartlett, the Faculty of the Built Environment at UCL. I'm Blanche Cameron. I'm an environmental design lecturer at the Bartlett School of Architecture, and I'll be hosting this session. Sustainable Places is a new monthly online event series led by the Bartlett, where we invite leading thinkers in the built environment field to explore all aspects of the climate crisis and how it intersects with the built environment, from sustainability and green design to climate adapted cities and housing. Today, you're joining the very first event of the series, Sustainable Places, Climate Adapted Cities. This session also relates to the UCL Green Infrastructure Network launching this month, with a sharing event coming soon, which will be sent out to participants after the event. Before we begin, a little housekeeping. This session is captioned live by a professional human captioner. If you wish to view the caption on a separate browser window, please click on the link shared in the chat. This event is being recorded, so the recording and transcript will be added to the Bartlett UCL Faculty of the Built Environment YouTube channel and forwarded to registered attendees after the event. The format for today, I'm going to first welcome our guests to present for the first half of the session, and then that will be followed by discussion and a Q&A before we end promptly at 2 o'clock. We encourage you to submit a question for the speakers at any point during this lecture by clicking on the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. And in this Sustainable Places event, we'll explore how the built environment sector can help implement, manage and maintain, care for biodiverse urban landscapes and the changes needed to get there. We'll be discussing new opportunities for employment, training and skills, financing mechanisms that account for more than just economic returns, the real empowerment of people and communities and organizations, and the radical collaborations between health, ecology, planning, design, construction, and stewardship that we need in order to make this happen. We'll imagine what scale of change might be possible for healthier, fairer, and more resilient societies, and what steps we can take to make all cities nature-based. Today, it's my pleasure to welcome 4 amazing panelists. I'm very sorry to say that Wendy Allen, award-winning garden designer who works with local communities to implement nature-based solutions, can't be with us today, but in her place, we're still here with Drew Davy, Sustainability Insights Manager at Grosvenor Property UK, Trustee Gedge, President of the European Federation of Green Roof Associations, Founding Director of livingroofs.org, John Little, Biodiverse Urban Public Realms Landscapes Innovator and owner of Hilldrop Wildlife Gardens, and Johnny Wates, the lead trustee of the Wates Family Enterprise Trust, philanthropist and social entrepreneur, inspirer. The first part of the session I'll be facilitating, and I would like to come to first introducing yourselves as panelists. Trustee Gedge, if we come to you first, please.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen so I get directly into it. You know that I'm the president of the European Federation of Green Roof and Wall Associations, but give me a moment, I'll get my screen up and start my little presentation. Hopefully you can see that. So I thought I'd start off with, this is Blackheath, where I live, and these are what are known as the Blackheath B roads. And that's really my starting point because I've just been interested in nature all my life. And this is where I'm from. This is a cockleshell beach in East Kent. And I just want you to bear with the blue plants because the blue plant will come up a lot in this short little presentation. And this is a roof up in Bishopsgate in the city of London. And these people work in this building. And this is the first time they've been allowed to go on the roof where you've got the Echium vulgare, which is very similar to the cockleshell beach. And the point here is we can create landscapes on buildings that are good for biodiversity. And I'm particularly interested in this bird because this bird has collapsed in my lifetime, and it's called the linnet. And a lot of people don't really think very much of the linnet, but it's a very pretty bird, and it's collapsed. And if we put good biodiverse green roofs up in our cities, wherever they are in the United Kingdom, we can deliver for the linnet, which I will show you later. We can also create landscapes at roof level that people can enjoy. And I would like to see people be able to go on green roofs, which are designed for biodiversity. But this one is a more formal, semi-intensive green roof at Hoxton, which can be viewed from the station and as you walk into the Museum of the Home. So we can make places that are actually of interest to people and to wildlife. And obviously, with an energy crisis, we can also create renewable energy at roof level while also delivering for biodiversity. And this is a roof up in Bartlett on a children's hospice, which is doing exactly that. These are what are known as biosolar green roofs. And obviously, being the president of the European Federation, I get to see and witness innovation around Europe. And I'm really interested in how we can bring this to the United Kingdom. This roofing actually increases the amount of biodiversity, but also this particular style of panel usage, which is what is known as bifacial, can increase the energy production by 10% on a solar roof. And I think it's something that needs to go on schools, social housing, everything. So that's one of the things that I'm up to. And returning to the linnet, I was employed as an ornithologist to study the Greenwich Peninsula for birds back 22 years ago. And there were 7 to 10 pairs of linnet on the Greenwich Peninsula at the time. And now this is a linnet feeding on a green roof in the Greenwich Peninsula, because there are now more linnets on the Greenwich Peninsula than there were 22 years ago, because all those yellow circles are developments that have green roofs that have been designed for biodiversity. And I come back to Blackheath because when I put pictures of Blackheath out on Twitter or whatever, the number of people who just say driving across Blackheath or walking across Blackheath and seeing the wildflowers really enhances their life. So it's about people and wildlife and delivering for climate change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dusty. Fantastic way to start the discussion. And John Little, if you'd like to introduce yourself next.
Hello. I'll just share my screen first, if I can. Okay. Cool. So yeah, I don't know. I've been beavering away, I guess, in urban places, trying to squeeze in wildlife and soils, but as importantly, trying to respond to the way people live. And I guess what I'm very interested in, as well as the infrastructure, which I'm kind of known for, the green roofs and some of the green infrastructure, I'm very interested in how we look after places. So I'd like to see money go into funding time. So money going into paying people to have the time to look after places properly. So these two amazing women lived on the estate I used to look after, Clapton Park Estate. They essentially, my job was it started off as a maintenance contractor. But as soon as you introduce time and money into urban places to look after them, you don't have to build loads of stuff necessarily, but to look after them and give people the time, then you can talk to Zainab and talk to people and understand what people want. And it's all about the people. So we adapted the estate really to suit these people. Obviously we did, because they lived there. We didn't live there. So I'm very keen on trying to move the emphasis slightly away from constant capital investments and into revenue, into people, into training, into gardeners, into people that care for places. These two images I use quite a lot because this kind of sums up what happens at the moment, I feel. Certainly when you're looking after public space. You know, there's a big investment, for instance, in the photo on the right. a big investment in a stainless steel spade, and that kind of that sort of sums up where the money goes. It goes in the front end, it goes up front, it goes towards getting an image, getting a picture taken for the funders. Here's a picture, and then we all walk away and nothing happens. And we should take the emphasis from that front end and move it into people who look after places, because if you invest in the people that look after places, you invest the money directly into people's pockets, and you also invest in people that understand the place. And we find that I would say that most people love having people around, love having people looking after a place, having people to talk to, having time. So that's where I'd like to see the emphasis shifted. I am also really fascinated about how we can inject some sort of joy and biodiversity, and of course, all the other benefits that green infrastructure brings, but invest into the everyday stuff. So here's an everyday thing. This is somewhere to park your bike. You know, it functions to park your bike, but it can do so much more, can't it? You know what I mean? You know, it's habitat, it's joy, it could be interpretation, it could be all those things. So everyday places, everyday infrastructure, it's such an amazing opportunity to actually make those things function on more than one level. So that's a bike shelter. I've also been obsessing mildly about car parks, very everyday. But they're the places to actually start to make beautiful. These are the places that we have to go to. These are the things we have to use. And we have the opportunity and the skills now to actually make these places an amazing space and a learning space. So this is a car park we recently were involved in, and we replaced the car park bays with gardens. So these are car park bays. They would have had cars on. We've put gardens in. So that's kind of a very easy and simple way to say this is what we should be doing for the future. We should be replacing the hard and the everyday with the joy. That's what I think. So that about sums up what I'm interested in: people and everyday stuff.
That's lovely. I love the investing in the everyday, John. Yeah, perfectly put. Thank you. And our next panelist, Davy at Grosvenor Property UK, please.
Hi, everyone. Lovely to meet you, and very excited to be here. Thanks to Blanche for the intro. So to give you a bit of background about Grosvenor, in case you don't know who we are. So we're a 340-year-old company that have a heartland in Mayfair and Belgravia in London with 5.5 billion of assets under management. And I think you'll find this with all of the panelists today, and especially from my perspective, are very excited about biodiversity and sustainability. I come from a background, so I'm an ex-biologist, so I'm excited to be part of the team here. We last year launched our first biodiversity strategy, which was at the time fairly innovative in the market. And there are, as I think as we'll go through, there aren't that many biodiversity strategies out there. And I think for me, the really exciting bit and the thing that I'm most passionate about is how do you integrate biodiversity in strategic decision making at the C-suite level. So I was a strategy consultant for 6 years, and it's how do you make it easy for people to make these decisions. And so we, in mid last year, set ourselves the target of a 20% uplift by 2030 using the DEFRA metric. And I think what will be interesting as part of this discussion is there are probably 2 or 3 things I think that are key. One is how do you bring people and integrate people in that journey? So we also released our first ever people strategy called People Positive earlier this year. And one of the main things coming out of that, which is not unusual for central London, obviously, is access to green space, which I think all of us have realized during COVID is something that we really need and we really want, but I think has been underinvested in general. And so it's how do we catch up with that and integrate biodiversity, which again is a very underinvested problem within sustainability. Then the second thing I think that would be most exciting is how do you then integrate that at a strategic level? So how do you incentivize people? How do you finance it? How do you ensure that people are brought on and make a cultural shift to value biodiversity? And we at Grosvenor have done many things to try and instill that from the top down in everyone's decision making. And then the last thing I think is making sure that you're doing the right interventions in the right places. So I think we'll get onto this, but we work with Trustee, for example, to look at our green roof and where we can best integrate green roofs into our biodiversity uplift. But for us, it's sort of a no-brainer that we need to think about biodiversity. And I think for me, one of the key interesting stats was that more people go to a royal park or a green space in London than visit a national park, which is not surprising given the urbanization that's going on, but it promotes the importance of our urban green spaces. That's me.
Great, thanks very much, Drew. Yes, making it easy to take action, making it easy to integrate into strategies as well. Very interesting. Thanks a lot. And finally, to Johnny Wates, just to introduce yourself now, please.
Thanks, Blanche. Hello, everybody. I'll pick up the baton straight away from Drew. I spent an hour in Battersea Park in central London this morning playing football with my son. It's just a fantastic environment to be in. But there's 2 or 3 reasons why I'm really interested and pleased to be here. The first one is family heritage. There's a pedigree in my family, if you like, in placemaking. 2022 was the 125th anniversary of the Wates Group. That's our family business where I've worked for almost 30 years personally. Since my great-grandfather founded the company in 1897, we have believed that business done well should be a force for good. The built environment, aka neighbourhoods, has always been our place of work. Over the years, we've built, repaired and maintained a multitude of buildings of virtually every type, from public housing to prisons, from St. Paul's to currently a vast gigafactory. And we've done it in virtually every town and city in Britain. We care about our legacy. I'd go further. We understand that our survival as a business depends on our ability to deliver social, environmental, and economic outcomes in balance with each other. Secondly, I believe that climate change and biodiversity loss are 2 of the greatest threats that humanity has ever faced. 15 years ago, I started a renewable energy services business. My family partners backed the endeavour, wisely or not, with capital, and for 10 years I was chair of that company. Then 5 years ago, I went back to school and studied a master's in sustainability leadership at Cambridge University. And there I learned things I cannot unlearn. Sustainability is, of course, a broad church, especially nowadays. What really caught my attention, though, was the science around climate and the rate of biodiversity loss. I don't think I will ever come to terms with the World Wildlife Fund's estimate that there are 70% less animals on the planet compared to when I was born, 70%. So humanity is willfully conducting a gigantic and extraordinarily risky experiment with the only place we can call home. In family business parlance, we are betting the farm. So the third reason, to pull those first 2 together, really, why am I really interested in what brings me here? This combination of lived experience in the business and the burden of knowledge have caused me to reorder my personal priorities and to start dedicating resources at my disposal to addressing the twin threats of climate change and biodiversity loss. I believe the best way I can do that is to try to reconnect people in cities where 60% of the global population already live with Mother Nature. My belief is that each one of us must take responsibility for addressing the twin threats. We cannot rely solely on others, whether it be government or business or civil society, to solve our problems for us. This might make climate change and biodiversity loss seem more tangible, somehow less abstract for people. We've been in this space. Blanche mentioned that I'm a trustee of the Wates Family Enterprise Trust. We've been funding work in Manchester, part of a really good coalition of people with the same belief for the last 3 or 4 years, and we've learned a great deal in that time. And now I'm working with Blanche at a very early stage, but also with Trustee and with John, to develop a plan for massive urban greening, starting with a prototype in the UK but with a clear intention to demonstrate through doing that the massive deployment of nature in cities, with communities at the heart of the process, can be done at speed, at scale, and with the creation of immense social, environmental, and economic value.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Johnny. That's launched us perfectly into this discussion, and it's great to have you on the panel too. So if you would all like to share your videos and unmute yourselves, I think that's a great opportunity to get into some of the questions that we want to have a look at today that are part of this discussion. The first of those, just briefly, if we can have a look very quickly at what we mean by nature-based solutions. And as you say, Johnny, a massive move to bring nature into cities with communities at the heart of that process. Why would we be doing that when there is such an economic crisis, when some people can't put food on the table or pay for their energy bills or the prepaid meter? We're facing an economic crisis that's the greatest in a generation, and 1 in 4 children on average are living in poverty in the UK. So what is it that makes nature such a priority, given that people are facing such difficulties? That's the first I'd like to throw out. And maybe, Johnny, perhaps you'd like to come back straight away on that one.
Okay, sure. A hypothesis would be that the distinction between social value, environmental value, and economic value is partially false. One of the things that I'm on a steep learning curve myself, so I hold my hands up. I come from a very different background. I'm not a practitioner in this space, not yet, at least. But I spent enough time with you, Blanche, and with Dusty and John and others. And I'm really starting to see that the intertwining of these issues is interesting. The idea of capitals, not just economic capital, but social capital and environmental capital. There is value in this activity. There's value in social activity. There's value in environmental activity. So I wonder whether a reframing or a recasting of these things. So I'm a traveler, I'm curious and I'm open-minded, but I wonder whether that's a way into this part of the conversation, which is that just to think about cost just to think in the short term is in some ways limiting.
Yeah, absolutely. Dusty.
Yeah, I think it's always difficult when you've got a cost of living crisis to sort of justify some things, but we need to, in a sort of pragmatic ways, understand, that some of the things that we need to deal with, renewable energies, nature, people's well-being, are actually all interconnected, and quite often we put them in silos and say, right, that's renewable. It's certainly an issue that's going on in one government department is we're having no nature, we're having lots of solar panels, and that's because decisions are being made. And we need to blur those boundaries. And people's well-being is as important as what the capital cost is. And it really goes back to what John says. We focus on the capital costs, not about the value over the next 10 years and, back-ending the value. And I may be just getting slightly off topic, Blanche, but everything's so front loaded and everybody's so front loaded looking at what does the capital cost, and then nobody cares about what happens afterwards. And it's the value of nature-based solutions and sustainable solutions in the mid and the long term that is more important than their capital cost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said, John. I think you've probably got would be nice to follow up with some of the things that you're passionate about on that. Yeah,
I guess I'd always think that there's a relatively small investment in putting more people in places, and that's an immediate investment and a fairly easy investment sometimes. And as soon as you do that, obviously you not only do you enable and train and give a better life to people in employment, but you also inject people into spaces where often poorer places where there aren't people to be able to lean on, there aren't people to ask to do things. It's just, this is what we found the most important thing we did looking after green space was actually listening to the people that lived there, not cutting grass, not trimming hedges. Those were actually less important, I'd say. It was the fact that we were allowed the time to do our job and do the more important job of understanding what people wanted who lived there. And that's just a human thing. I think I always think it's a bit like the why the repair shop is so popular, let's say, because people love to see people doing things. It's people that do that stuff. There's not bigger capital investment in repairing things. There's not huge capital investment. There's time investment. And I think if we could have a little mind shift into, yes, capital projects, yes, we need obviously lots of things to be done, but mindful always of how these things are ever going to be looked after and how what local people think about them in the first place,
Right, exactly. And I guess when you realize that things are all connected, as you were saying, Johnny and Dusty, that when you implement nature-based processes, the benefits to people are more than just the obvious immediate thing in front of them too. They're delivering on all kinds of other levels. I wonder if that's your experience as well, Drew, with Grosvenor. You're coming from a slightly different angle than the community-based, but you have immediate connection with communities through the nature of your business too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I definitely would agree with everything that's said. Like, we are trying to create places with the work we're doing, and nature is one of the key ways that we can do that. The thing that I would add though is that I would definitely question the myth that nature-based solutions are expensive. In the grand scheme of things, they're not, in terms of their the value that they give back to both the places that we manage and all of the other wider benefits. So I would definitely say to pick up on what Dusty was saying, that the value that you're bringing to central London, for example, from our perspective, is definitely well above the initial capital that we're putting in. And on top of that, for example, if we were to integrate a grey intervention instead to and to be clear, what I mean by that would be, say, for example, if we're putting in more drainage to drain away rainwater instead of a sud, in the long term, that's usually more expensive because of the maintenance and having to put it in the first place. And then with a sud or a sustainable urban drainage system, we'd be getting so many other benefits, and we'd be bringing on the community, which therefore, to us, I mean, there are difficulties with putting them in and where we can get permission to put them in, but it is definitely our now go-to is try and use nature-based solutions.
Right, and it does seem to be that there is a need for this. Obviously, the things that have been mentioned in terms of climate change and biodiversity loss, the climate change aspect, with so many people at risk. We saw 42 degrees plus in London last summer. And of course, there are many cities around the world where that's already par for the course, but there are many cities where that is going to be a new phenomenon as well. How we're going to keep people cool in the heat waves and absorb all that the storm water and reduce the flood risk and so on. That creates a huge disruption to people's lives, the devastation that can cause to people's lives, disruption to business and services as well, of course. So although I think that's probably not the most important thing in a lot of people's minds in the immediate situation, which is about, how am I going to buy shoes for the kids or get to school? That's a long-term issue that we need to address as well, isn't it?
I just to say one thing, if you're going to, any of these solutions, let's take SUDS for instance, any of those solutions, from an engineering point of view, they make sense. From a climate change point of view, they make sense. They won't make sense to people if they're not looked after long term. So if they become a place that is not a place that people want to see, and is not a place that looks cared for and looked after, then you're going to lose the support of local people when you want to put your next one in. So these places can function, and they need to function from all those other points of view, but they also need to function as a place of beauty and joy. And that can only really happen long term with investment in people to look after them. So I think that's a quite an important thing, and they're not sustainable unless they're looked after, I'd say.
Right, yeah. Dusty, you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, maybe, I think when you ask a question on the cost of living crisis and nature-based solutions, again, my concern there is, and don't get me wrong here, Blanche, is it a bunch of experts deciding that actually the public will always prefer, you know, more money in their pocket than nature-based solutions? It comes back to what Drew was saying in his thing about this people and what you were saying, you going out to go and do the people thing. I can't remember what you
People
actually...
positive. Yeah, our new strategy. Yep.
You know, and I'm sorry, I'm going back 20 years, but when I was involved in Lewisham Town Centre regeneration, you know, we had all these transport experts and all these people, and they said, oh, we've done some consultation, and the thing that people in Lewisham most worried about is transport. Well, the people in Lewisham aren't worried about transport because they don't drive through Lewisham Town Centre. That's people from Kent and from, you know, from the A20 and the A21. So we force them as community reps to go out into Lewisham Town Centre and ask the people of Lewisham what were their priorities. And always the experts have said the rivers are the least important thing. The people of Lewisham said the rivers were the most important thing. And so it's kind of interesting if you actually go out and talk to people. And I've been to about 4 or 5 conferences, last week, and nearly everyone says, go and talk to people. It's what John says, go and talk to people and ask them and engage them. And I think that's been a shift because experts have been running the shop for too long, and we don't actually go out and ask the public, what do they want?
And I think the other thing is when you're asking the public, if you've got people on the ground that are there regularly and looking after a place regularly, you're going to get a much wider demographic of people that they will engage with, rather than if you stick a gazebo up in a town square. You tend to slew the people that would walk up to something. Whereas when people are there on the ground every day, it becomes just an everyday conversation where you can pick points up from. So I think there's another advantage having people on the ground.
Right, and a lot of this is needed across the country, across the world, neighbourhoods that are managed with people, by people, with nature. But how are we going to do that? Because the report by the Landscape Institute recently shows something which is known, which is that there is a lack of training. We need more people on the ground. We need the investment in people to manage and care long-term for our nature and our neighbourhoods. How do we get there? What kind of partnerships do we need? What kind of people need to be involved? I mean, obviously from community groups up.
I think you need paid people. You need paid people to drive the volunteers and drive the people. You need to kind of prop up the volunteer system and all the other wonderful people that come out and give time for free. You need a core of paid people to make that function and make that keep working. That's what I think. I think because you want. We found if you start making the place look good as a paid contractor, then more volunteers, obviously, you know, volunteers come out then because they feel like it's a worthwhile thing. And also if the few very keen volunteers move on, which always happens, then again, there's that paid staff to prop things up and keep things moving, because things can go downhill very quickly when it comes to certainly with the aesthetic of a green space, you know.
Right, and it's not necessarily an easy thing to do. The sort of how to engage, get people together to take action. I mean, I'm thinking of Pitsea and the situation there where you have the need for nature-based solutions. Nature is a part of the work happening with community group there. I think it's Trust Links, and they're doing what they can in their situation. I think this is true across the country. I think people realise the value of how important nature is locally, but that there isn't necessarily yet the coordinated investment in people to be able to push that forward. I don't know how it would, Drew, if you would like to.
Yeah, I was about to say, so I think from a business perspective, I definitely think there needs to be more engagement on skills in the sector. But I personally think that there are probably 2 or 3 prongs to that. One is these skills need to be valued from the top down, and that's both the solution and the people that are delivering it. They need to be a valued skill, and that needs to be central to businesses' strategies. And I think that comes to a second point, which is we need to start thinking about a simple way of measuring and valuing the nature that we're delivering. So with probably people on the call already know, but with the new green infrastructure framework, there's things like the urban greening factor that you can use, but there's also DEFRA's biodiversity net gain metric to try and quantify what's going on. There definitely needs to be some better data source that we can use and value uplifts and demonstrate strategic sort of decision-making skills. And I think that then comes to the second point, or the last point, which is, in general, this is just undervalued at the moment across the sort of business space. And personally, I would also put in the public realm as well. And we definitely need to change that. I mean, with the following COP15 and the new green infrastructure framework, things are changing with the environment plan, etc. But it needs to accelerate. And yeah, and that for me is not just amongst skills, that's across the board.
So centralizing it in putting it into strategies at a local authority level, at a business level, also at a community level. But how does that happen when I think what we've been discussing requires more interdisciplinary collaboration, I guess. So, and this may be something, Johnny, that you've had experience in, either in this or in other walks of life. There are challenges to that. There are challenges to bringing people together from lots of different sectors.
There are. But I think the collaboration and the unconventional collaboration, parties that might not historically have spoken with each other or thought and operated in silos, often self-interested. I think there's undeniably a growing awareness of the state we're in. And there is a degree, let's be frank, of enlightened self-interest for business. Society's expectation of business is changing quickly. I mean, I wasn't exaggerating when I said in my introductory words that we genuinely think that we won't be around in 20 years' time as an enterprise, whatever our pedigree, if we don't grasp the nettle about the importance of shifting our outcomes towards more balance around environment, social. We're currently extractive, to be frank. And that's deeply uncomfortable, and it should be. It's becoming more uncomfortable. So I think that the other thing that we're saying is that that there is self-evidently there's more opportunity around carbon for businesses. So we have public targets, we have responsibilities, but there is also an economic benefit to businesses who see opportunity in low carbon or in climate adapted cities. The built environment is very carbon intensive. So, this is a huge opportunity as well as a huge risk for business. My sense of it, from being in both, I'm in both camps in a way. I've got a background in private enterprise, but I'm passionate about climate and biodiversity loss. So I'm passionate about places and cities. So I can kind of see things from different perspectives. I think that we need to think, all of us, at it may sound a bit hackneyed, but I think we do need to think holistically. We do need to think at what I call the system level, not in pockets. And when you start to do that, so for example, with the last 3 or 4 years, we've been working in Manchester with this coalition I mentioned, really unconventional group of actors working together that's given the project, which is about urban greening, with the community at its heart. So we've been learning, we had lots of mistakes, but it's taught us a lot. And I think we're better equipped now for the next turn of the wheel, how to collaborate, which stakeholders we need to get involved, how genuinely to get the community involved and owning it. I think one of the mistakes we made at the beginning was that we had this bright idea and we were very enthusiastic about it, and we wanted to make it work. Well, actually, that's not, you can't bring ideas in from the outside like that. In the end, it has to be legitimately, authentically owned by the community. So we've learned some methods about how we might do that next time. We're learning through practice. And my final thought is that actually we're not the first to have this thought. There's lots and lots of great examples of what's been done already, far beyond the UK, some of it, which is completely inspiring. And these outcomes in terms of social value, of environmental impacts, and actually economic impact as well, there's lots of evidence that it can be done. And I think we should take confidence from that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really.
Yeah, Dusty, you look like you might have something to say about that. What I was going to just mention as well, we'll have a think, but in terms of the training and skills piece, I think things like the Green Roof project, Chris Bridgman's project in Milton Keynes, and your ideas as well, Dusty, in terms of developing training programs that can actually help deliver this stuff, is where maybe you start to unlock what are economic opportunities for people too, so that training and skills piece. I'd like your thoughts on this, all of you, as to the opportunities for that, because if we're going to deliver nature and nature-based solutions in cities, we need the people who are able to do that. We need to invest in them and to support that maintenance long term as well, as John, you were saying.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say certainly the experience I've got with, for instance, landscape architects, garden designers, nearly all the people that are switched on out of that crew, all the kind of the high end, the people that are really in the know, they all know this is the way they've got to go. And this is what Johnny's saying. I think anyone in business, anyone involved in any way, whether or not they're absolutely committed to it personally, one way or other, they've got to go this way. And it's and this is the momentum that hopefully we're going to have to try and, because you've got to force it. There's a big proportion of it you've definitely got to force. There's a proportion that people are going to use, but the switched on people know this is the way their business has got to go for sure. Otherwise, they're going to be left behind.
Well, if I may, John, on that, there's all the stuff going on at UN, you've got TFND and TF, whatever, there's all these things. It's the direction of travel. It's the direction of travel. And, financial and real estate companies have got to report on climate change and nature. That's really high-end stuff, but it's the direction of travel. And I think the conflict is, or not or the tension is, and I think it's what's interesting about a discussion like that. That's what's happening in high end. But then you go down to what John, the community, and there's lots of questions about how sometimes the councils don't talk to the community, and the community doesn't. I mean, that is just because we have processes in the United Kingdom. We like to blame the council if everything goes wrong. We never like to say, well done, council, for doing something good, because just that's our cultural. So, we've got to shift to a process where it becomes a more collaborative process, because it is actually quite polarized. And I can't answer some of these questions are like really, really quite complex to answer. But to take on board what Johnny said, just in my little world of green roofs, I can think of two countries. There's in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro, there is a guy who is just greening up the favelas with urban food grain. He's been doing it for 7 years. It's just a fantastic project. He's now getting international funding to do it. There's the same group of people doing it in cities in Mexico, just doing it, and they're getting funding. So it can come from the bottom up. And the favelas in Rio de Janeiro are pretty grim places, I suspect. But he's going, I've got an idea, I'm going to do it. And he's become very, very successful. So I think there are really good examples from around the world where this is happening. And certainly in Europe, through my federation, I know about those. So the direction of travel is there. It's just how we speed it up.
Yeah, I think, and I think we can't be under the illusion that it's all happening right now, because certainly in our experience, very recently, there's planning consent going through for infrastructure projects with absolutely no emphasis on habitat or planting or joy of any sort. You know what I mean? So these things, the system is still stinks in places, but if we can just. And also, it's that conversation, to have that conversation early on with developers, with construction, with planning. Just have that little conversation of how can we make this better? How can we integrate more? How can we make it multifunctional? How can we reuse some of the materials that we're taking off site? All those little niche conversations always tend to happen way, way too late. It would be lovely if they were embedded in the system very early. I know me and Dusty have had this for years, where an architect wants a green roof, and then by the time they ask about it, they want a beautiful lush meadow roof, and then they've designed the structure to take a 30 mil of soil. So there's that kind of conversation early on, which would be great if we could have. It wouldn't have to be very big conversations either, small ones.
I think to definitely roll with that as well. I think for developers it is changing. So we're getting more and more questions about biodiversity now from developers, but there's definitely still a massive lack of knowledge. So for example, I had one developer come to me, and again, this is an anecdote, but say, why am I not getting any biodiversity net gain uplift from this external wall? And it turned out that external wall was some dead moss that was complete, and that was having that was bleached and was coloured. And that just gives an example of some of the thinking that goes into the developers, and therefore I think there's a big challenge of how do you bring yeah, I definitely agree, how do you bring people along in that journey and increase knowledge around biodiversity and nature in general?
Well, I've got a little comment on that, Drew. The thing is, it's also the process in the construction industry. You know, I write a report, goes to the planners, there's a planning condition, then it goes back to the architect, then it goes to the main contractor, then it goes to subcontractor. I went to inspect the roof that I wrote a report for. I said, who changed the specification? And they wanted me to sign it off. So, you know, there's a culture, there's a process that needs to also change, where that is a value right up until the moment that it's delivered, that people are checking that they're delivering what they're meant to be delivering.
Speaking as
because obviously,
speaking as an insider on the construction side, I think with maybe there's value in looking at ideas, approaches for retrofits, as opposed to I think the construction process, the development process has got lots of difficulties in it, but it's only ever going to be a small proportion of the solution. If we're going to do things at scale, it needs to be retrofit ideas that are economically viable. And the little bit of work we started to do together, I'm very excited about it, because we have limited resources as a philanthropist, say, and we've had a good think about where to apply those resources. And we think urban greening is the sweet spot, because there aren't many places where you can get the social impact, the environmental impact, and actually the potential of economic impact. There are examples out there already where people are doing this. You just gave an example of that work in favelas. It might seem a long way away, but I think it's highly relevant. So part of our, without wanting to overstep the mark, part of our exploratory discussion together is, whether our philanthropic funding, whether we can put forward a proposal that attracts other philanthropists to join us and put their funding with us, partner with a good local authority who's already on it, and there's some great work going on in UK local authorities, partner with you guys around urban green infrastructure, and you can start to sort of play with something that's not possible if those parties act independently. Something to do, for example, with addressing the shortage of operatives and staff to actually make urban greening happen in practice. So it is early days, but I think we've got to step forward.
Yeah, if I may, Drew, I think I'm allowed to say this, because you looked at with Gedge and my company, we looked at retrofit opportunities within the Grosvenor estate. And to me, in terms of what I do, and actually what John does, non-green roof stuff, is the retrofit is the most interesting, because, and I'm sorry, some people might not like this, there's too many people involved in new developments. There's too many experts. With a retrofit, it's a relatively, you've got a client, you've got experts, and that's where you can really engage the community, perhaps create local jobs, deliver good biodiversity. And by retrofit, not only do we do something at the micro level, London, 32% of central London can be retrofitted with green roofs tomorrow. The impact globally, on a macro scale for London in terms of climate change adaptation would be incredible. So it's a win-win all the way around. Sorry.
And interestingly, I'm just thinking about retrofit and I'm just thinking the way you look after green spaces. In effect, you are retrofitting. So when we came into a green space that was relatively blank, you retrofit in that to boost the biodiversity and boost the community environment. So there is a big opportunity to retrofit. You just need to invest in people to go in there and actually change things.
Well, I'm going to cut in with the support from the Q&A, the questions that are coming in too. One of the questions, what is the most challenging part of greening cities? And I would say exactly that, because as development slows, or if there isn't going to be that much new development, and we still have to retrofit our existing infrastructure, then I think that the retrofit is the most challenging part, and then the partnerships that you need for that. It is like gardening something, continually stewarding it and caring for it, isn't it, John? And I think that is actually the most challenging. All the focus, like you were saying at the beginning, is on the upfront capital investment, but then the revenue infrastructure to pay for the upkeep and maintain the services.
It's not just maintaining it, it's to be there and come up with innovative ideas to slightly change it, because that's the other thing you can do if you're there in place, because you know the place intimately, you know.
Exactly.
If I may, I showed a picture of Blackheath B Roads, the first one. They're retrofits. They're actually retrofits. John knows this because he saw it on last Saturday. I still get people emails saying, no, it must be more technical than that. I said, no, you just dump a load of rubble, put some loam on and put some seeds in. No, but can I have the full technical specification? No, you put some rubble down, you put some loam on it and you seed it. And they go like, no, it must be more complicated than that. And it's not. I just find it kind of amusing,
I'm going to go to some of the questions in the Q&A. You can, the panelists, you might not be able to see them, but one of them from Adam Mitchell, who's a health student. He's writing his dissertation on degrowth economics, or regrowth, depending on how you want to frame it. What he says is, what are your thoughts on reducing costs, profit and material use in building design? How could that help support or influence biodiversity? For example, leaving aside a patch of bare earth for whatever grows instead of garden planting. It's an interesting question. I think if anybody's got an immediate response to that. And is this approach compatible with current business operations? What needs to change? I guess.
On, John. Well, only two things I think about. I think one thing that mystifies me is the lack of timber buildings in the UK. That's the first thing that is weird. And an amazing way to capture carbon, because there's a big emphasis on growing trees, but what we want to do is to capture that wood and keep it in good condition to make it last and not release the carbon again, and putting it into a structure would be a lovely way to do that. And there doesn't seem to be much conversation around that too much. I'd say if you're going to just that again, that little emphasis about what the space around the new development is going to be like, what materials that you're building with, what materials you've demolished, all those, how can we incorporate those back into the actual development and especially back into the landscape and the opportunities that gives. Don't take stuff away, keep stuff there if you possibly can.
I definitely agree, but I think I think because there's kind of within the question, there's the assumption that doing these things doesn't make on occasion economic sense, and actually we've found that they do. That you can actually it's been proven that a payback period for a building with BREEAM status, which obviously there's questions on, but leads to higher yields. So I think we have to get away from this thinking that actually it's a trade-off, that actually there is economic sense in making these decisions. And quite often they're also using cheaper materials from more sustainable places. That it's just a win-win-win. So I think it makes sense to me.
I think it would help a lot if you think about the energy sector and transport, automotive, the sort of legislative impact on those sectors has been huge, and it has stimulated huge innovation and deep change. The built environment, for some reason, hasn't been subject to the same weight of legislation. There has been some around the edges, but I think it would help enormously. It's a sector that struggles with innovation for various reasons, and it always has. We're still broadly doing things the same way that we were, and I think there's a deep level of frustration within the sector about how to overcome that. And I'm not saying legislation's a silver bullet, but I do think it's notable that other sectors are transitioning or transforming at a rate that recognises the severity of the issue that we face, the built environment's 40% of emissions, and yet. So just to flag that, you wouldn't necessarily expect a developer, which I am, contractor, to be saying that, but I think we do need support and help from a legislative point of view.
Right,
Yeah.
rate of progress is slow. Yes, Dusty.
Well, I'm just conscious of the time, but I think
Yeah.
to me, it always comes down to policy, and policy is legislation. If you can change policy and legislation, things happen. Hence, we've got a lot of green roofs in London because there was a policy made in 2008. That's the only reason. And people get frightened of legislation, but you go, that's transition. You know, you change the laws and the processes and things happen.
Well, it's a bit like the film, isn't it? All things everywhere, all at once. I mean, there's the need for policy change, but there's also the need for everything from grassroots action upwards, and business change, and how we frame things, just the way that we think about things. And I'm really appreciate the comments that people have made, you know, Johnny and others, about completely rethinking the separation between environment, society and economy, and that they're all intimately integrated. And as you said, Johnny, that these twin, inextricably intertwined crises, as the UN recognises, you cannot decarbonise without nature, and nature is our climate regulator, the ecosystem, the source of life, and so on. Biodiversity is life. So we're reliant on all of these things. So everything else becomes secondary in a sense. But actually, and what you've discussed and shown, John, as well with your work, is that how people can very immediately get involved with that change process if you have people on the ground who are there to talk to and discuss. And in fact, that's where a lot of the innovation can happen. And I think that's really interesting. And I know there are a lot of other questions in the chat that we haven't got to, things like about urban food growing, the relationship of policy, and also the relationship of use of resources. There was a question there from Binav Aliman from Iraq about use of resources, and is that our next issue? Well, it's our current issue, and in fact it is exactly that extractive process of natural resources. You can tell I'm beginning to wind up, but if there's anything else that anybody would like to ask, do keep asking your questions in the chat, and we'll try and answer them afterwards as much as possible too. Might share some further responses after this session. But I'd like to finish just by thanking everybody for participating. Thanks as well for everybody who's tuned in online. This is the first in the series, and we're looking forward to more. The next one's coming up in March at the moment. But thank you for joining us today and for the conversation. We'll be back on Wednesday, the 22nd of March, that's it, with place-inspired architecture and how rural architecture, design and craft can be inspired by their natural environment. And sign up details are in the chat. Hope to see you there. And we'll send information out about the UCL Green Infrastructure Network and its launch soon. So do keep in touch, and we hope to see you all very soon for more discussions about nature-based solutions and climate-adapted cities and neighbourhoods. Thank you very much, everybody. And thanks for joining today. Thanks, Dusty and Johnny and Drew.
Thank
See
you.
John. Thanks a lot. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.